Awesome. Thank you, Joan. All right, we're going to get a few more minutes as people keep popping in here. In the meantime, if you guys would like to introduce yourselves in the chat box, and there's also a question of the day, what is your favorite spring and summer outdoor activity? I'd love to, see who's on the line here and what you guys are interested in doing, and we will get started shortly. All right, well, my phone says that it is noon, so we'll get started. And I'll just talk a little bit while we let people still come in here. But thank you for taking the time out of your Friday at noon to come to our Lunch and Learn to learn about live staking. Live staking is an excellent opportunity for people to stabilize your stream banks if you are tight on a budget and looking for some quick stabilization. This webinar is going to be recorded, so if there's anything you miss or want to share or watch later on, I'm hoping to have this up on our website by this afternoon, as well as the PowerPoints and all of the resources that are within those PowerPoints. I will make some time at the end for some Q&A. So as I'm talking throughout this webinar, if you have questions, please pop them in the chat box, and I will be able to answer those at the end of the presentation. So let's get started here. Oops. All right, so special thank you to the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection. This workshop and webinar series has been provided by the Environmental Educational Grant for 2020 by the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection. So special thanks to them. And the grant also funded some brochures we're currently working on about climate change for homeowners and climate change resiliency options for them to be able to handle climate change and stuff like this. So live staking is one of those tools and resources that people can easily use in their yards. So we're going to get started with this, but please watch out for that brochure. It should be coming out this summer. Likewise, my name is Brittany Hartzell. I'm the watershed specialist for the Columbia County Conservation District. We are here on Sawmill Road at the Ag Services Building in Bloomsburg, and we are always here to help any resident business farmers to deal with their natural resources or any concerns you have. Of course, my expertise is more in the watershed area, but we have a whole bunch of other types of opportunities for you guys to, get technical assistance from us. So we do partnerships, education, technical assistance. So if there's anything that you see a need of help for, please give us a call and we'd be happy to come out. So today's agenda, today we're going to do the webinar and we're going to be talking about, what is live staking, how does it work, what species are able to do this, how to harvest them, and then also how to plant them. And of course, as I mentioned, I'll leave some time at the end for some Q&A. Now tomorrow, there actually is also a workshop for this, and we currently have 7 spots available. So if anyone is interested in actually going out and learning how to identify things in the field and actually collecting live stakes so you can take them home and plant them that day or within the next week or so, I do encourage you guys to please sign up. It is first come, first serve, but if you go on our website under the workshops tab, just like when you signed up for this webinar, you can sign up for that. The location is going to be emailed to you. So once you sign up, I will send you an email with the location. So I just wanted to start off. I was on Facebook a while ago and I saw this image and it says, this is not a stick, it's a wand, guitar, it's a shovel, a horse, etc. Anything your kid can imagine. But of course, I couldn't help but look at it and think it's a live stake, right? Because it has a lateral meristems and the angled bottom and all that stuff. So you'll understand what I'm talking about later on, but hopefully by the end of this presentation, you'll be a nerd just like me and see something like that and be like, oh, that's a live stake. So what is live staking? Well, first and foremost, it's an extremely easy method and really cost effective, if not a free method of revegetating our stream banks. And of course, by adding vegetation to your stream banks, you're preventing erosion and any type of major channel movement there. Live stakes themselves are actually cuttings from woody materials, specifically when they're in their dormant form. So during the more winter and early spring months, such as right now. And when you're planting these live stakes into wet soils, they actually are stimulated to grow roots and produce whole trees. So from these little cuttings that you get, once you put them in the ground within the next couple of years, they'll actually fully root into the stream banks, and they will grow into whole trees. And those roots will be really great at holding the soil in place and preventing erosion. So you can see in the top photo there, that's kind of just a recently planted live stake along those streams. And then you can see in the bottom photo, not the same stream, but you can see what the effect would be. So I just really want to quick talk about, why is our stream, why are our streams eroding so much? This is an issue across the state, if not across the nation and the globe. But one of the biggest drivers of erosion is the lack of any streamside vegetation, especially permanent vegetation such as trees and shrubs. So you can notice in these photos that I have here, really no vegetation on those banks whatsoever. In most cases, these vegetation are like turf grass or cold season grasses that don't have very long root systems, really not holding any of the soil back in, and it just slumps into the ground. Also, you can notice from these photos that there's a lack of access to the floodplain. So the stream is kind of caught within this channel, and it really is having trouble moving and managing all that excess water, especially during like a big heavy rainstorm event. So that's another thing. The more water you add to a system, the more energy it has to move that soil and move that piece of land. So lack of access to a floodplain is another issue that we have, as well as stormwater runoff, adding extra water into our streams as opposed to letting it spread out on the floodplains. Any stream disturbances such as dredging or anything that you do within a stream that deals with the banks or even the channel bottom. Something we commonly see in especially residential areas where people will mow directly up to the very edge of the stream bank. We like to see a nice buffer, maybe like a 5-10 foot buffer of just grass or ideally shrubs and trees. But mowing up to that stream bank is again going to really, limit how much vegetative growth you have, and of course contribute to erosion. Again, converting any land that we have to grasses and impervious surfaces is going to be detrimental to the stream. Livestock access as well. If you guys are on any farmlands and have some cattle or livestock, you potentially would be able to fence those out so that they're not, beating up the banks and helping that slump in there. And also another really key, especially here in Columbia County, there's a lot of historic land use along these streams. These streams are very vital to our county. A lot of historic mill dams were put on our streams. They since have been removed or abandoned, but that has left some really fine legacy sediments, which again is very hard to stabilize when you have these small sediments that are easily picked up by water. So you have an eroding stream bank. Why use live stakes? Well, first of all, they are easy. So very simple solution. They're also very cheap, if not free. If you go and collect these on your own, it's just, your time and labor, where you can also purchase some live stakes from some vendors. However, I do encourage you to use, the native growing, shrubs and trees that we have here in Columbia County. They very quickly revegetate stream banks, and you often will hear us talking about riparian buffers, which I absolutely encourage. However, the first step to that is to get some, vegetation really quickly established. And of course, using these quick growing trees or certain shrubs, they grow really, really quick. So it's a good first step in restoring your stream bank. Of course, they're going to reduce erosion and land loss, as we've discussed, but they also have the added benefit of improving water quality by filtering pollutants out. They also provide a lot of shade, you can see in those photos there, and that's really critical for a lot of our aquatic organisms, such as trout and even macroinvertebrates. So that's really important. The wildlife is going to love it. There's lots of fruits and berries and nuts and seeds that they can eat off of these shrubs. So that's a great resource. And also these are a flood resilient species. A lot of these, if not all of these species I'm going to present to you today, actually they love to be, have wet feet. They love to be in wet areas. So even if you're not thinking about stabilizing a stream bank, maybe you have like a wet area that you want to just add some extra plants in. Live stakes is also, a great option for that because they do like and require wet feet. So live stakes, where would you plant them? Of course, as I mentioned, minimally or non-vegetated stream banks are ideal. So if you don't see any vegetation or trees or any shrub growth, I encourage everyone on here to try to get some vegetation established within those areas. In most cases, it's going to be within the bank zone, which is circled here in red. And like I mentioned earlier, you're going to want to plant them in any wet or saturated zone. So that's why the bank zone is very critical. And that overbank zone that you see in that photo there is also a potentially place that you could plant these shrubs. You just need to verify that it is frequently inundated with water. But as long as you're planting within the saturated zone, which is generally within the bank, and that's generally where the erosion is going to concern, that is where you'll plant them. Bonus points though, if you do complete for a full riparian buffer, in addition to the shrubs, extending that buffer out and adding additional trees and upland trees up the slope really improves it and adds additional benefits to our streams. So how does all of this work, right? It's actually really easy. And in the most simple form, you cut some twigs, stick them in the ground, and you watch them grow. So it's pretty simple and easy. However, the science behind it's a little more complicated. And we'll get into that briefly, but bear with me because it's not too complicated, but I just want to review it very quickly with you guys. So let's get into some science here. So when we are talking about live staking, the thing that allows these, what we look at on the outside, they look like just sticks, like they're not doing anything without any growth. But this is how it works. So there is a tissue within these cells called meristem tissues. And you'll notice that if you see that photo there, that shoot up there, or also a bud, is called an apical meristem. It's at the top of the stem there. And that produces a hormone called auxin. And an auxin is a group of hormones that actually tell the plant to remain in a dormant state. So a lot of the plants that are outside right now, they're starting to finally break their buds off, and they're starting to finally no longer be in a dormant state. However, they've been in a dormant state since, late fall of last year. So the auxins are telling the plant to be in a dormant state. And when you take a live stake and actually cut that part off, what you're doing is also cutting off the signal that tells it to stay in a dormant state. So when you cut off that signal, it tells the buds, okay, we're no longer in a dormant state. We need to start growing leaves. We need to start growing roots. And these little lateral meristems, which are also known as lateral buds that you see in the photo there, they have this really unique flexibility where, depending on where they're at, the needs of the plant, they can form anything from roots, leaves, or branches, whatever they need. So when these live stakes are planted and when they come in contact specifically with wet soils, that tells that lateral meristem bud to form roots. So you'll see in the bottom photo there, the roots form once they're inserted into the soil, and anything that's above the ground will start forming leaves and potentially branches. And of course, the plant will continue to grow as usual, just as if you planted it as like a seed. And of course, these are really quick to establish type shrubs. So hopefully it will continue to grow and establish fairly quickly for you. So along with that science, there's some other science that has been done in the past about these and identifying what are the best species outside that you can harvest for these live stakes. The NRCS, a while ago back in 2007, identified the best ones that we can go out and look at that have the best potential for rooting and establishing for success. And there's quite a few species. I'm not going to go into all of them, but I just wanted to throw that out there so that you can see there's quite a few species that are an option here, and we will go into a few of them later on in this presentation. So the species I threw up there, you can easily find them anywhere in the wild. Now, I do have to caution, if you are looking for these species outdoors, please make sure you do have permission to cut the plants if they're not on your property. That would be ideal. However, if you are looking for livestock species, they're pretty easy to find if you're familiar with the type of habitats that they grow in. So in a lot of cases, especially if you have a stream on your property, these plants really naturally grow in streams and stream type environments. So you can potentially look around your property and see if you have any already there that you might take a couple of cuttings from. Likewise, any riparian or streamside areas that are along the stream that are wet, that's where these shrubs are likely to grow. Wetlands as well are very good sources for these types of plants, especially because wetlands are generally, in most cases, untouched, so they have a lot of vegetation growing. The Fish and Wildlife Service has a really great map that you can actually, search around for, and it'll tell you all the designated wetlands in our areas. So that's a great tool if you're looking for spots. Also, if you find any like really shrubby, young, regenerating forests, such as, off of an old crop field, those are some good places to find them. Along roadsides, public parks, trails, if you start looking for them, you're likely going to find them. So I encourage you guys to just, as you're driving around, you can definitely look at them and be able to spot them and say, okay, that's where I'm going to go to get some cuttings. And again, you want to make sure you get permission to cut if they are not on your property. So something that's going to be really important for you is to have some resources available that you can identify these trees when you're outdoors looking for them. Being able to identify them is critical, right? We don't want to get the wrong type of tree that's not going to establish. We don't want to get an invasive species that's going to become a nuisance down the line. So here's a couple of resources. Personally, for me, I use my cell phone all the time. It's easy, less things to carry. And I use an app called iNaturalist. You actually just take a photo and it will actually tell you what that animal or plant is. It's very good. I highly recommend it. But there are also some online resources as well, such as the USDA Plant Database or Go Botany. And there's a couple of really great, field guides and tree finders out there as well. Also, just a couple of identification tips for you guys. You're going to want to think, what time of year is this when you're looking at trees? So if it's in the summer or the fall, these guys are completely in bloom. They have their flowers, their leaves, their fruits, and everything is starting to be produced. And so that's a unique time because it's the easiest time of year to be able to identify plants, especially when they have their leaves up and you can see them, they're pretty distinct. However, because we have to take these cuttings when they're in the dormant season, the summertime is a great time to go looking for these types of trees. You might want to mark them or just make a note in your head and so that you can come back during the dormant season and take those cuttings. However, if it's winter or early spring, such as right now, this is the easiest time of year to actually spot woody plants because there's less vegetative growth. There's not so much green out there, so you can see all the stems and really get up close and personal and be able to see them. And probably the easiest way, and in addition to looking at stems and bark, is to look at the bud of the tree this time of year. Buds are extremely unique to each species. So if you can identify the bud, you can identify the tree. So those are a couple of tips for you. And we're going to start, actually, I forgot about this slide. Also, before you cut any trees, after you've identified them, you really want to look first for any pests or diseases before you cut. Something I really want to stress and get out there is the spotted lanternfly. Some of you may or may not have heard about this, but spotted lanternfly is becoming a big pest for Pennsylvania and some of the surrounding states. It loves any type of hardwood, and you can see they have different life cycles and stages in that photo there. I encourage you to get to know, what the spotted lanternfly looks like. It is in Columbia County, and you're likely going to start seeing this more and more. Like I said, it's a nuisance. So if you spot a spotted lanternfly anywhere on your tree, I just encourage you, number one, squash the spotted lanternfly and report it to the USDA or Penn State Extension. But also, please don't transport that over to your property so to enable that to continue to spread. Likewise, if you don't see the bug, you also want to look for the egg cases, which this time of year are pretty plentiful. So they have egg cases that kind of look like mud, and then they also dry out and they kind of get a little scaly looking. So that's definitely one of the biggest things to be aware of. But there's also some other diseases that you'll want to look for, such as like fungal leaf diseases, if there's any scale on it, lace bugs or borers. You'll just check it out. They're relatively, easy to identify. If you have a pest or a disease on your tree, I just would not encourage you to take a cutting from that because likely that is going to continue and persist once it is established on your property. So I'm going to go through a couple of species that this applies to, and it's important to stress that not all tree and shrub species are able to do this. However, there are some tried and true species that we can go with. So here's a couple of trees in particular, and I will get into shrubs later on in this presentation. You can see willows are an extremely common and really good species to use. There's black willow and silky willow, probably the most common around here. Also box elder, river birch, tulip poplars, American sycamores, and eastern cottonwoods. So those are some of the trees that you can do this with. And I'm just gonna go over a couple of these. These are the ones that I think are probably the easiest to find, most readily available. And so you'll be able to utilize these trees in addition to the shrubs. So the first one I want to talk about is black willow. Black willow is probably, honestly, one of the best trees if you have a wet area to plant in. It absolutely loves to be in wet areas, which is great. So it's a really flood resilient species. It grows into a really big, large tree, but it is very shrubby. So you can cut it down and maintain it if you would like it not to get that large. But it grows very fast, which is great considering that we're trying to grow these really quickly for the stream bank to be protected. You can find these really easy along any riverbank, floodplains, wetlands. They're pretty easy to identify. They're that really long, large tree with those really long little leaves that you see there, long, slender leaves. And you also see the little catkins once in a while, which is a great wildlife resource. They don't have the most distinct bark. It's just kind of gray and rigid. However, those leaves are probably the best identification for that. And again, when we talk about buds in the winter time, you can see they just have one scale on their bud. It's pretty simple to identify. The second one I wanted to talk about is river birch. River birch is also really, really common, especially along the Susquehanna River. You see a lot of these river birches. These are, again, a really fast growing tree, not nearly as large as the black willow. These are just a medium to large tree. They are, again, found along riverbanks. They have this cinnamony bark that curls and peels, especially as it matures, it peels even more. They have those catkins that can be green or brown depending on the time of year throughout the summer. Again, a really great wildlife resource. And their bud is pretty distinct. They have 3 or more overlapping scales on their bud. So you can see, compared to the previous one there, you can see the scales on the bud. There's more. And finally, the other one I wanted to talk about is the American sycamore. Pretty distinct tree, not hard to identify at all. This is a very fast growing tree. It's also a very large tree. It's found along floodplains and wetlands, and it just loves any area that's wet. It has a really distinct bark. It is a grayish tan, kind of almost like a camouflage looking. You can see in that photo there. And as it gets towards the top of the tree, it's almost completely white. The buds themselves are surrounded by leaf scars, and there's only one scale. And they actually have these very distinct ping pong sized seed balls. So if you ever see those things flying around, those are from sycamores, and they also have a very, very large distinctive leaf as well. And one other thing I want to stress about, using trees, and the reason why I focus on the sycamore and the river birch and the black willow, they're easy to find around here, but you'll also, if you're planning on getting these species on your stream, you want to be mindful that you'll have to find some younger trees. especially because when these trees are fully mature, you're likely not going to be able to get up into the canopy to take any clippings. So trying to identify younger trees is very important for this. It'll give you better access to be able to get in there and get some cuttings from them. All right, so let's move on to shrubs. There's a lot more shrubs than trees that can do this, and here's a whole list of them. You'll notice a lot of them look very similar to each other, so this is, again, where being able to identify those buds and those distinctive characteristics is important. Any type of dogwood, really any type of shrubby dogwood, would be one of my first recommendations. Easiest to find, easiest to identify. There's gray dogwood, silky dogwood, and rhodosier dogwood. So those are some really important ones that we'll get into a little bit. Also, there's buttonbush, really distinct kind of, button-looking flowers that they produce. Winterberry, this is a great resource. This will, during the winter times, they create these red berries, are really bright, hard to miss, and that's another great identification tool. Spicebush as well, arrowwood, common ninebark, the common elderberry, highbush blueberry, and of course the speckled alder and the smooth alder. These are all options for live stake species, and I will get into just a couple of these. These are the ones that I most recommend and know that they are very readily available. You can find these pretty easily throughout the county. So the first ones I want to talk about, I'm actually going to lump them into one slide here. So there's silky dogwood and there's rhodosier dogwood. They have a lot of similarities, but they have some distinct differences that will help you identify them. So both of them will grow really fast. Of course, it's a characteristic of shrubs, and that's what we're looking for when we're trying to quickly stabilize these banks. They have a more smaller kind of habit. It's more of a rounded shrub, so a little more compact. If you're trying to look at the stream, these are really great because they're not quite as tall. They're not going to cover the stream so much. They're found really anywhere, not only just along rivers and wetlands, but you can also find them in fields and more dry areas. So they're a really good resilient species. They can go in any location. They have these suckers on their roots that will form dense thickets. So once you plant them, you might get some more that grow up around it. In the summertime, you'll see they have these clusters of white flowers. And then later on, those flowers bloom into little fruits that are a favorite of a lot of the songbirds we have around here. So when you're trying to compare the differences between the silky and a rhodosier dogwood, of course, in the wintertime, you can look at the scales on the bud. Silky has 2 scales and rhodosier doesn't have any scales. The silky fruit is actually a rounded kind of bluish white fruit, whereas the rhodosier one has a white fruit with that distinct black spot on it. So that's really the best way to identify it during the summertime. However, my favorite way to identify these is through the pith. So when you actually cut the stem itself, you can see in the upper right photo there, the stems look really similar, but it's opposite of what you think. When you cut the stem itself, the inside of a silky will be red, and the inside of a rhodosier will actually just be white. It'll be a solid color. So it's opposite of what you think, but it's a really distinctive characteristic, especially because you will be cutting these anyway. So if you see that big red stem, it's going to be one or the other, and you'll be able to identify it once you finally get that cut and see that inner pith of the stem would be red if it's silky or white if it's a rhodosier. The next shrub I want to talk about is spicebush. This is probably my favorite native plant or shrub in general. I really like spicebush a lot. It grows a little slower, so not nearly as quick of a growth, but it becomes a very large, medium-sized shrub. And another really important part to consider, spicebush for this is that it's really shade tolerant. So if you already have some areas where maybe you have a large tree, but you need some extra stabilization, smaller roots right on that bank, this is a great option for you, if it is a shade tolerant, if you need a shade tolerant tree. These shrubs are found in anywhere that's moist, especially wetlands, very common around here along the Susquehanna River. The bark is pretty thin, and you'll notice that there's a smooth bark, but it has these brown bumps on top of them, especially in their younger phases. They have really interesting looking flowers in the springtime. It's a greenish yellow kind of cluster you can see on the photo there. And then later on in the summer, they actually produce these red berries. It's known as spice bush because it actually has this really aromatic smell to it when you crush the leaves. And also you can also harvest the berries. They are edible. They're a little spicy, don't taste that great, but if you can put these berries and the leaves, you can create a tea out of them. So lots of options with that. In the fall time, you get these really bright yellow, orangish leaves in the fall time. So it's really nice looking. And of course, they have these really distinct buds. You have 3 or more overlapping scales on the winter bud, but you can also see that their flowering buds are more of a distinct round shape. So that's another good characteristic. And something else I just wanted to mention is the spice bush swallowtail butterfly. You can see in the upper right. This is actually the host plant for that. So if you've ever been lucky enough to see one of their caterpillars, you can see the caterpillar looks like it has really big eyes. It's trying to mimic a snake or something, you know, that no one wants to eat. Really cool looking caterpillar, and it feeds primarily on the spice bush plant. So if we don't have spice bush, we don't get these butterflies. And these are pretty commonly seen butterflies, those black and blue butterflies. So that's another great benefit to this species. And the last one I'm going to go over is elderberry. Elderberry is high in demand right now. It's a really, if you harvest those berries, they're really high in antioxidants, really good for the immune system. And it's a native plant we can find around here. It doesn't grow too fast, but it's got a moderate growth to it. And it's also similar to a dogwood. It's got a rounded shape to it, a medium-sized shrub. It's found similar to a dogwood again. It doesn't have to be in a wet area. It does love wetlands along rivers, but you can also find it commonly along forest edges or in fields. The bark is a greenish brown kind of color, and specifically on the young plants, they get these really distinct bumps, which is actually their lenticels where they do their gas exchange. But in a young plant, that's really distinct characteristic. It has 3 or more scales on its winter bud, you can see there. And in the summertime, they get these white lacy flowers. And of course, later in the summer, they develop into these edible blackish blue fruits that you can harvest. They're very tart. You can eat them, they are edible. However, most people prefer to make them into syrups and whatnot for use. All right, so let's get into harvesting live steaks. So really key, I've kind of touched on this already. When you harvest a live steak, you're gonna wanna collect them specifically in their dormant state. So that's gonna be late fall to early spring. In this area, it's gonna be November through April. And you'll notice that if you look outside right now, a lot of these species are starting to finally break their bud. So we're coming up on about the end of their harvesting season. However, I think within the next 2 to 3 weeks, you can still have some time to get these cuttings and they'll be able to continue to produce those roots. So when you're harvesting live steaks, you don't need any crazy equipment. You just need some loppers, maybe a pruner, a bucket to hold them, and then also some gloves, I would recommend. So what you want to do after you've identified the species that you're going to cut, you've looked at if it has any diseases or pests associated with it, and you say, okay, this is what I want to use for my live steak. You'll look at the stems and try to cut the smaller, younger stems. You can look for anything that's at least pinky sized or larger. In general, between your pinky and your thumb, diameter of a branch is where you want to cut. And so you're going to cut that as close to the main stem as you possibly can, just to get the most for you. And then once you have that steak, like you see in that photo there, you can get multiple different steaks off of that cutting. So starting from the bottom, you'll go up every 1.5 to 2 feet, and you will cut. And you can see based off this photo here, you can get 3 or 4 different live steaks off of one single cut when you start from the bottom of the branch. When you do have your live steak finally cut and ready to go, one really important factor to think about is you'll need to cut the top of the steak flat and the bottom of the stake at an angle. And we do this because we want to indicate to ourselves, okay, which side are the roots going to grow? So you need that bottom to be distinct. And also the angle will help you actually dig it into the soil as well. You will want to remove all the side branches from the live stake if there's any additional little branches or growth there. And then you'll want to keep them in a bucket. Again, that angled bottom, you'll want to have it facing downwards. If you're not planting it immediately, I would recommend putting water in the bucket and storing it in a cool, dark location. That'll keep it in its dormant state until you're ready to plant. Ideally, you want to plant within 24 hours, but if not, you can keep it stored like that for up to 3 weeks. A couple of other important notes, and I've touched on this a little bit, but when you're identifying your plants, not all species can be live staked. So you can't just go up to any tree and cut it and expect it to grow. However, the ones I've presented today will be able to. Some of the plants look very similar, especially in their dormant season when you don't see the leaves. Some of them can be non-native or invasive plants. So that's really important, is to get to know the invasive species that we have around here that might be mistaken for something else. We don't want to plant those on our properties and then create a bigger problem there. When you do, if you're using different live stake species and you have different species, I recommend bringing different buckets and having them labeled. That way you know what species is in which one. You'll be careful not to over harvest. Of course, we want to continue all that value that tree already was providing where it was growing. You want to allow it to regrow. So in general, you want to not remove more than 30% of the plant. But being able to plant, or being able to cut that species will actually help it add new growth and be a little more resilient, while we can take home those cuttings and use it for ourselves as well. And like I mentioned, you'll want to make sure that bottom of the stake is angled and the top is flat. That way you know which end to plant into, and it also will help you drive that stake into the ground as well. You can see in the photo there. So when we're planting the live stakes, once we've collected them, say we're ready to plant them that day, in general, you want to space them about 3 feet apart. A lot of people recommend putting them in kind of like a zigzag pattern across the bank. If the soils are compacted or rocky and hard to get into, maybe if you're splitting your live stakes, you might want to get a piece of rebar or something like that you can make a pilot hole with. You don't have to do this, but if you have some really compact like clay soils, this would be a good idea. So you might want to dig a pilot hole for some of these with a rubber mallet or a hammer. Then when you're ready to put the stake in, again, you can use a rubber mallet or just with your hand and drive that stake into the ground. You want it to go as deep as possible with at least 1 to 2 of those meristems or nodes remaining above the surface, so you can get new growth and stem growth above the surface, whereas the bottom of what's underground is going to grow some roots. Another very important factor that doesn't seem very common sense, but what you want to do is make sure that you put it into the soil at a 90-degree angle from the bank, so perpendicular to the bank. So that means that it might be, hanging out over, but of course, once these start growing, they always grow towards the sun. So even though they'll be sticking out towards the stream, they will start growing upwards like a typical tree would. And if there is, if you use a rubber mallet, if there's any, splintering or damage that occurs, all you have to do is just clip the end of that stake to flatten that top. So I have a video here that I want to show you just to give you a demonstration and some visuals. This is through the Pennsylvania Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. Great little demonstration video, and I will play that right now.
Live stakes are stem cuttings taken from trees and shrubs during their dormant season before the buds break in the spring that are inserted directly into the ground. Live stakes are a great tool to build riparian forest buffers because they have a low cost and it's something that landowners can do easily on their own property. Live stakes can be purchased from a local nursery or harvested directly from trees and shrubs already on your property. Black willow, elderberry, and silky dogwood are a few recommended species for live staking. These trees and shrubs grow readily along stream banks. To harvest live stakes, cut branches that are roughly 1/2 to 1 inch in diameter into 18-inch to 24-inch lengths. Pruners or loppers work well for this. Cut the bottom of the stake on an angle to form a point. This will help with inserting the stakes, and it also helps you remember which end is which, since the stakes grow much better when they are right side up. So make straight cuts on the tops to keep the ends distinguishable. Small side branches should be trimmed off of the stakes. It's best to plant your live stakes right after cutting them. If you will be waiting a few days, keep them fresh by storing them in a bucket with a few inches of water or wrapping them in wet burlap or newspaper. Keep them in a cool, dark area until you're ready to use them. Insert the stakes pointed end first, perpendicular to the ground so that about 2/3 of the stake is in the soil. Plant the stakes near the stream bank so they reach the water table. Live stakes should be placed 2 to 3 feet apart in several rows along the stream bank.
All right, so hopefully that will give you a better visual for how that looks and how that how you'll plant them and get them in the ground. And there we go. So once you have your live stakes planted, they're really low maintenance. There's not much you need to really do. I just would recommend the first, year or two, up until when they're established, to go out each spring or summer and just take note, are these sprouting? Were they successful? And it really helps to, when you're planting them, tag them and label them just to remember where you planted them and what species was planted. If there are any damages or some that just aren't sprouting and working, you simply just need to replace those stakes. Depending on how far in advance the buffer has been established, you might even be able to take a cutting from one of your previous cuttings. You might want to occasionally trim or prune those shrubs, again, if you want to have some extra access to looking at the stream, replacing the stakes, and also checking for those diseases and pests that might pop onto your property and become an issue. And of course, I can't stress enough to always look for and remove invasive species. Whether you're planting live stakes or not, invasive species are a contribution to erosion, and we definitely want to promote native species in our waterways. So once these are established, depending on the species, it'll give about 2 to 5 years, and you will see the fully restored bank. These trees will grow into complete shrubs and trees. You'll notice that there's no erosion, or at least visible erosion going on there. Lots of really great, buffer to filter out pollutants, filter out those sediments, a lot of shading of the stream, so those trout are going to be really happy. And it's a very natural type setting. So some people might be deterred from that. So you can also see in the photo on the right, you can add some color using those dogwoods or the winterberry or the spice bush. So you can add some color into the mix there if you prefer a more aesthetic look. And I just really briefly want to talk about some other effective, what we call BMPs, or best management practices, that you can do on your stream in addition to these live stakes. We encourage offering no mow zones, which are basically, just setting aside, land that's along the stream and letting it grow wild, not mowing it or even just mowing it maybe once or twice a year for maintenance, but really just letting that grow wild, keeping that vegetation on the bank. Would be really important. And of course, you can expand on that and do a fully forested riparian buffer. So that is basically where you buffer the stream sides with a whole variety of shrubs and trees, and you can also put some pollinator seed mixes in there, and it would be really great for wildlife as well as the stream. If you're on a farming type of property, livestock exclusion fencing and also stabilized crossings are really easy tools you can do to keep the cattle out of the stream, keep their hooves nice and dry while still being able to access the stream from a central location. But by excluding them using that fencing, you'll be able to grow that vegetation back on the stream bank without them toppling all over it. can also grade the banks. Now, this will require a permit from the Department of Environmental Protection, and it does cost a little more, but it is also a really great way if you want to reconnect your floodplain. If you have really vertical banks, grading your banks in addition to the live stakes is a really good option. And there are also some other options such as stabilization structures. You can use logs or large rock materials for those structures. But again, they do require permits and they're very, very costly. So here's some additional resources. Again, I'm going to have this entire presentation is recorded and I will have it up on the website, but also the PDF will be posted as well. So you can click these links. You can watch some more of those video demonstrations, and there's some additional readings that I will provide for you if you want to learn a little bit more. I also encourage you guys to check out some of our other Launch and Learn webinars that we've done. There's a whole bunch, such as the no-mow zones and the riparian buffers, what I highly recommend checking out. That'll go into a little more detail of how we can stabilize streams with those buffers. And if you're interested in just learning how streams work and more about stabilization structures, we also have a webinar on that. If you're interested in learning about trees, I have a webinar on that, as well as our Keystone 10 Million Tree Partnership that we are a partner of, which basically they have a goal of planting 10 million trees by 2025. So we're a partner for them. They give us free trees. So if you're interested in a buffer, we potentially could get you some trees to plant on your property for free. So give us a call if you're interested in that type of project. We also have our new Better Backyard Certificate program. So if you're not interested in a full buffer, but you have some really great things you're doing on your property, we'd love to come out and certify your property. And we also have some webinars on invasive species, native plants in the natural areas of Columbia County. So I encourage you guys to check those out on our website. So with that, I'm going to throw up my contact information here. If you have any additional questions afterwards, feel free to contact me anytime, or the district. You can find us as well at columbiaccd.org. We're on Facebook, and you can also see our phone number there. If you have any questions, please give us a call. We'd love to help you out. And just another reminder, we do have a harvesting collection workshop tomorrow for live stakes. It'll be from 10 to noon. And we'll be talking about species ID in the field. We'll be actually cutting live stakes, collecting them, and you'll be able to take those home to plant on your property. So we have 7 spots left, first come, first serve. So again, just sign up on the workshops tab under the Conservation District's website. And once you do that, I will be able to see your email, and I will email you the exact location of where we'll be harvesting these. It will be in Columbia County between Bloomsburg and Berwick. It also will be outdoors, so be mindful of the weather that we may or may not have tomorrow, but all collection equipment and work gloves will be provided on the site. So with that, I'm going to open this up for some questions. If you guys have any questions, please throw them into the chat box. I'm happy to stick around and answer them. Cheryl asked if the webinar is going to be recorded. Yes, it'll be recorded. I'm hoping by at least 3 or 4 o'clock today. It should be up on our website and our YouTube page, so you'll be able to watch this again or share it with anyone if you're interested. So I'll just give it another minute or two. If you guys have any questions, please just throw them in the chat box. I'm happy to answer them. Jonas will need pruners for tomorrow. You will not. We purchased pruners for the workshop, so all equipment will be supplied. If you do prefer to use your own pruners, that's perfectly fine with me as well. Sarah, I just sent an email with the location date, maybe just like an hour ago. I will check my email and make sure that got sent to you. If not, I will just forward that over again. Hopefully you'll get that. Awesome. All right. Does anyone have any questions for me about live stakes or anything conservation related? I'm happy to stick around and answer. All right. Well, if there's no questions, again, thank you guys so much for taking the time during your lunch hour to come listen to me talk about live stakes. I hope you guys learned something new, and I really hope that you guys are able to, use what you learn and be able to go out on your streams and help stabilize them. If you do, have any need for assistance or questions, or want some additional recommendations for your stream, please give me a phone call. Again, here's my contact information. I'll throw that up there. I'd be more than happy to come out, check out your property, and give some additional recommendations. All right, so Rain asked if there's any ability to live stake in drier overbank areas. It depends on what species. I know the dogwoods are pretty, they can really grow anywhere. So any of the rhodosier dogwoods or the silky dogwoods would be a good idea. And also actually elderberry. Elderberry is also prefers some drier areas. So they're both pretty, I forget the exact word for it, but they can go in either type of locations. So yes, there are species that'll do more drier overbank areas. Also, looking at the trees, things like tulip poplar and stuff like that. If you're able to plant some bigger trees in there, they can also do pretty well in some dry areas. All right, are any other questions out there? All right, well, if that is the end, if there's no more questions, awesome. Cheryl says she can't wait to try this herself. I'm really glad that you guys are hoping to get out there, get some cuttings. Again, if you need any recommendations where to find species, I'm happy to chat with you and help you find some things. But if we have no other questions, that is the end of today's webinar. Again, if you guys want to come out tomorrow to our workshop, just go to our workshops tab on our website. You can sign up and I will send you that location. All right, well, that's the end of our webinar today. I hope everyone learned something and had a great time. Hope you guys have a great weekend and take care.